Well, good morning, everybody. This is the first session for the second day of the ERC forum today. And I think the theme of this session is quite interesting, as you may have heard yesterday. It is under the theme of the international cooperation in energy transition. I think all of you guys will hear some certain great example from our expert on the panelists here. So, well, let's start with, I introduce you the four distinguished speakers for this session today. Let me start with the gentleman at the far right of my side, Mr. Shinya Nishimura. He worked for the World Bank as a senior financial sector specialist and energy sector coordinator for Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. He has extensive experience in corporate and project financings in the energy sectors. He joined the World Bank after graduating from the Fletcher School with Master of Art in Law and Diplomacy in 2003. Since that, he worked as a senior energy specialist at the World Bank on energy sector for reform, financial restructuring and project development in the Central Europe, West Africa, and East Asia. Recently, he has been working in Thailand, Bangkok from July 2023. And next to him, Mr. James Shear. He worked for the U.S. Embassy in Thailand for the first secretary in economic section. His most recent assignment was with the Department of Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs. And as well, impressive, he is the recipient of Superior Honor Award and Meritorious Honor Award at the department. For his educational background, James received his Master in International Economics from the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and got his bachelor degree in International Relations from the same university. Let me move to the third person. This person is Dr. Chitti Mangkalasiri. His position is Research Team Leader at the Technology and Informatics Institute for Sustainability. His educational background is environmental engineering, and after that he got a 2 master degree from France and pursue his doctoral degree from France as well in material science. Well, his expertise in the various areas such as life cycle database, sustainable consumption and productions, and eco-efficiencies. And last but not least, the fourth speaker next to me is Mr. Robo Velasco Rosenheim. He is a director of partnership and Apex Market, working at the International Tracking Standard Foundation. Mr. Robo has a decade of experience supporting green energy development in Asia and the Pacific. Through this role, Mr. Robo had enabled hundreds of entitled to source renewable electricity in line with the RE100. Currently, he is focusing on helping government and utilities to engage the energy attribute certificate through the globally recognized ERC standard. Okay, in this session, I think we have 45 minutes, so each of you guys may have 8 to 10 minutes for your presentation. I would like to share this session for the first speaker. Mr. Shinya, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much to all the distinguished speakers and participants of this conference. Very honored to be invited to speak at this event. I would like to just give you an overview of some of the things that we see on a global level as well as on the regional level, and then come down to some of the things that we are doing with our client countries to give you an example of some of the international cooperation work that we are doing at the World Bank for energy transition. So this is a lot of information, but what this these charts are representing are on the right-hand side, the blue are the more, I would say, OECD countries. And then on the left are some of the client countries that we are working with in the East Asia countries. So as you can see, in terms of the per capita energy consumption, the East Asia region is still quite low when you're comparing it to the OECD countries. But then if you look at the forecast, if you look at the energy demand forecasts, you see that it's very, very high. It is oftentimes more than a couple of factors compared to the other OECD economies. And that trend is expected to continue for quite some time as well. Emission per capita also is quite high in OECD countries because of their, some of the countries also have thermal-based power still. But then you see that the East Asia countries that is expected to grow also still has a low emission per capita, but this is going to expect it to be growing as well. Now, what I also want to point out is on the left-hand side, this is actually a motorization rate. And I think these charts would be provided to you online as well. But what's interesting is that if you look on the left-hand side in Indonesia, Cambodia, Vietnam, a lot of the motorization actually is in the two-wheeler section. Actually, if not almost like 70–80% of the vehicles in these countries are actually two-wheelers, which presents a very interesting opportunity and challenges if you think about EV transitions as well. The whole point of all of these statistics actually is that East Asia is leading in the emissions as well. Globally speaking, East Asia represents about 60% of global emissions, 72% of coal consumption. And as the charts in the first slide shows, this is expected to keep growing if unabated. Now, the UN panel for climate change has identified the region as extremely vulnerable. We're expecting that about 7.3% of the GDP could be lost by 2100, which seems very far off, but 7.3% GDP loss due to climate change impacts, and that's the risk of exposures to the risk to infrastructure and assets that we're expecting this loss from. There we go. So East Asia countries have progressed in terms of making commitments. This is, I apologize, this is a little bit old information from COP26, but my understanding is that many of the countries have either strengthened or accelerated their commitments for climate change in COP28 that was following. But I think the important thing here is that even though the commitments were made at the political level and the targets were set, what we see lacking are the actual roadmaps and how to get there. Oh, it's come back. Many of the countries are struggling with right now. Now, what also I want to emphasize here is that the trend is shifting quite a bit right now because we see that the cost of production on renewable energy has gone down significantly. Now, so as this chart shows, many of the renewable energy technologies are quite cost competitive, if not just outright cheaper than many of the thermal power plant technologies. If you also include in carbon emission reduction or mitigation measures like carbon capture and whatnot, you're going to find that having a thermal power source is going to be a liability in the future. It could, and you will likely have stranded assets, even though currently this might be what's providing you with a base load. So as the charts indicates the energy transition requires massive reinvestment into energy sectors. So what we're expecting is that the power sector investments have to quadruple to a significant amount, $240 billion annually. From that amount, which is still already large, to more than $1 trillion per year by 2030. So that is quite a lot of money. So what we're seeing here is that the clean energy's cost structure is going to require a very high upfront cost. And at the same time, for low-income countries and middle-income countries, that coupled with the limited ability to pay higher tariffs, as well as the limited ability to actually acquire financing, is going to be a challenge for these countries. And that could lead to a stunted decarbonization and threatening the energy security of the country itself. We see the example of these in the region as well, and I will get to that later in the presentation. So we have many sources of funding right now, carbon finance, as well as climate change, and you have CIFs, the Green Climate Funds, the World Bank, ADB. All of these funds are being made available. Now, there are various other instruments that are now emerging, like results-based, as well as other instruments that are being developed and are now proliferating into the financial markets as we speak. And of course, as represented myself, there are other concessional financing sources that are made available, that are run by many of the MDBs and the UN agencies that you work with already. Now, but I just want to also point out that the no action actually does pose a significant risk for the countries as well. We're seeing that it's a threat to competitiveness of the economy. So, for example, EU imposed CBAM, for example, now only effectively impacts a small section of the economy, but this is expected to be expanding. So now this is going to actually impact directly the competitiveness of the economy. At the same time, we saw that the cost of renewable energy technologies have been going down. Now, being able to make use of these technological advancements is also a benefit in terms of energy transition. And lastly speaking, when we speak to many of the global financial institutions, we see that they are now very sensitive towards climate change and sustainability issues, and that this could impact financial markets in the near future, and it's happening already for countries like Indonesia. Now, it's a very complex process that involves many different sectors, and it needs to be leveraged with not only public financing, but also private financing as well. But if we're talking about public financing, we're just not just about budget allocations, but we're also talking about fiscal instruments like tax incentives, subsidies, that would enable you to leverage the private capital more that is necessary in all sectors of the economy to complete the energy. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of this, the World Bank support, but I just want to make just one last point to make here is we do support analytical work to our client countries, like the country climate development report for Vietnam, and this is because Vietnam is especially vulnerable to climate change impacts. We're expecting about 14% of GDP loss due to climate change impacts, and that's the motivation behind Vietnam coming to us for these help. And I'll just to let you know, so these are the kind of analytical work that we're doing. So we've taken the historical trends and we're taking into account the current policies. And then we also take another scenario and analyze that using accelerated decarbonization scenarios. And then we target what the cost would be and how it would impact the energy mix in the future. And so this is the sort of the result of the analysis. We do see that in order for Vietnam to achieve its targets under the accelerated decarbonization, they would need to use more than the cost of investment would increase at about $120 billion. But again, I remind you, this is a country that is highly vulnerable. We're seeing about 300 villages on the coastal line being vulnerable to a water damage. Mekong Delta region, where half of the rice production that supports Vietnam's economies, as well as 17 million people living there, are vulnerable to climate change impacts, and that's the motivation behind going through exercises like this. And so we are launching a regional study on regional integration, which we hope would also help to accelerate the energy transition and renewable energy deployment in the region, as well as a more East Asia level intervention called the Accelerating Sustainable Energy Transition. And we're going to be working with ASEAN Center for Energy to provide the necessary technical assistance and capacity building for everyone in this region. Thank you.
Thank you for the informative presentation from Mr. Chinya. And I think we have sharing a point of view of the big picture of the World Bank is shared to us about the challenge of the climate change and a huge investment from both public and private sector to accelerate the change on carbon emission, change to reduce, and a picture between and developed country and the developing countries. So let me move to the next speaker. Mr. James Shears, please, the floor is yours.
สวัสดีครับผมชื่อเจมส์เชย์ผมเป็นนักการทูตอเมริกันที่ทำงานที่แผนกทางเศรษฐกิจของสถานทูตอเมริกันผมมีความรับผิดชอบที่ประเด็นที่เกี่ยวข้องกับพลังงานผมพูดภาษาไทยได้นิดหน่อยถึงแม้ว่าผมคิดว่าผมพูดภาษาไทยไม่ค่อยเก่งเท่าไรเพราะฉะนั้นผมจะพูดที่ภาษาอังกฤษขอบคุณมากครับ thank you. Well, thank you. I'll let my ajans know that I got through that introduction. First of all, thank you to the OERC and to all the distinguished speakers for including us here. Today's panel focuses on international cooperation, so I'm here to highlight the bilateral cooperation that Thailand and the United States are engaging on energy, particularly the energy transition. I'll first provide a little bit of background on the United States, and for President Biden and our administration and for the United States government, climate change and energy transition are among the top priorities, and they provide the centerpiece for the Biden administration's foreign policy. As I'm sure many people are aware, President Biden and a US Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, which unlocks huge potential for clean energy investments and for the United States, working in conjunction with its world partners to engage in energy transition and a clean energy future. Not only are we looking at unlocking over, I want to say, $200 billion in clean energy investments, but the capstone of the IRA and the United States' efforts on energy transition is to work with international partners and its friends and allies in order to achieve that clean energy future. Thailand, as one of our most important partners and friends in the region, is central to this focus, and I'd like to take a moment and congratulate Thailand on many of its efforts that it's engaging on energy transition, particularly as it looks to net zero and carbon transitions. Now, the United States and Thailand work bilaterally on many issues, but one of the keystones of our bilateral relationship is the energy relationship and the cooperation on energy between the two countries. Our annual United States-Thailand Energy Policy Dialogue, the UTEP, serves as the policy framework that governs our bilateral cooperation on energy. We inaugurated the UTEP 4 years ago, and most recently, the Ministry of Energy hosted the fourth UTEP here in Bangkok in April, where we led a lot of discussions on global energy trends, policy issues, technical assistance, a regional cooperation, with a lot of focus on climate, clean energy, and the energy transition. We were thrilled to see over 100 participants at the UTEP from both the US and Thai government and from the private sector, and we were very, very thankful particularly for OERC's participation in the UTEP. Khap khun mak khap khun Congress. Now, UTEP provides the high-level policy dialogue for the discussions on energy and energy transition between the United States and Thailand. And it is through that high policy dialogue that we are then able to translate the work into technical assistance and capacity building that the United States engages with on Thailand. First, on technical assistance. As you can see here on this slide, I've listed several of the US agencies and US government organizations that work here in Thailand on energy transition issues. It would be impossible for one US government agency to cover all of the energy transition needs that Thailand and the United States have identified as priorities. Thus, we have a whole of US government approach, as you can see here, that involves a lot of different agencies. This type of whole of government approach allows us to tap into each government agency's expertise and then work with our Thai counterparts in order to engage on what they've identified as priorities for this energy relationship. For example, Her Excellency, the Minister, brought up electric vehicles. So our Department of State, our US Commercial Service, US TDA, USAID, all of them are working with Thai counterparts on a lot of EV policies, on charging infrastructure, on looking on how to electrify fleets, and so forth. And so this type of whole of US government approach is something that we've seen very helpful when it comes to providing technical assistance to our Thai partners. In addition to the technical assistance, we have capacity building programs. The US government hosts a lot of Thai government counterparts and private sector entities for a variety of capacity building programs on everything from training and workshops, study tours, pilots and feasibility studies, peer reviews, sharing best practices, information sharing, and so forth. And you can see here several examples of the type of capacity building in which we've engaged. Everything from visiting our energy labs in the United States to signing MOUs in order to engage in feasibility studies on pumped hydro at Vajira Longkorn Dam. But these types of capacity building programs really do build on the technical assistance that we provide because they provide both the United States and Thailand with the ability to share information and build up one another's resources. Now, there's 100 priorities and 100 important issues that the United States and Thailand are working on. But given the limited time we have today and the importance of what we're looking at in terms of energy transition, I just wanted to highlight some of the current work already taking place between Thailand and the United States on some of these priorities. As you can see here, under clean energy transition and net zero pathways, we're working with various entities in the Thai government, including EPO, ERC, EGAT, and the Ministry of Energy, on everything from energy sector modeling, utility modernization, and our Clean Energy Demand Initiative, which enables US companies to procure clean energy from Thailand in order to work their operations. Under advanced energy systems and storage, we're looking at everything from providing capacity building and technical assistance on battery energy storage systems. I noted that our USTDA colleagues are working on a Vajira Longhorn Dam pumped storage project. And then I also noted that we're working very closely with our Thai counterparts on e-mobility, including looking at smart charging management options for EVs in Thailand, which is a growing sector and one where we think Thailand will be a leader in the region. On frontier energy technologies, we're working with our Thai counterparts on a discussion of the use of small modular reactors. This is through our foundation infrastructure for responsible use of SMR technology. And then we're also working with our colleagues at the Department of Mineral Fuels at the Ministry of Energy on CCUS and a regulatory framework for that. You'll see here that we're also covering many other issues on methane abatement within the energy sector, regional connectivity, which you mentioned a little bit in your presentation, and then we are obviously looking at clean and future technologies, everything from sustainable aviation fuel to hydrogen and many more opportunities down the road. As we look down the road to the future, we also think that there are several other opportunities in order to further strengthen and deepen that Thai-US bilateral engagement. We're finalizing the completion of a 123 agreement. This is for concerning peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which would provide another alternative clean energy for Thailand to consider as part of its national energy plan. We think it's very important to continue highlighting the role of women in the energy sector. Thailand is so impressive in terms of its experts, and we want to make sure that we highlight the role that women play in leadership within the energy sector. We'd like to further our engagement and deepen our partnership with academics, think tanks, and NGOs in Thailand. And finally, we have the United States government has just invited Thailand to participate in a new initiative called the Energy Transition Accelerator, which would enable opening up several investments, billions of dollars of investments, in order to help Thailand achieve those energy transition goals that it has to achieve a clean energy future. So in sum, this was a very brief presentation that highlighted at the top levels where we are in terms of our bilateral cooperation. You'll see that the energy transition relationship between Thailand and the United States is strong, it's continuing, and it will continue to grow, deepen, and strengthen. We appreciate all of you being a part of it, and we're very honored to be here today to share this with all of you. Khap khun mak khap.
Thank you very much for your impressive presentation, showing about the good relationship between Thai and the US. We give a MOU, a wide range of projects, and including the capacity buildings. And I think we can go together furthermore about to accelerate the carbon dioxide reduction projects to the energy transition. Thank you. And can I have your question? Can you elaborate more about the IRA in the US, please? The acts.
Absolutely. The Inflation Reduction Act is essentially a piece of legislation that involves every sector of the economy. There is a heavy focus and emphasis on clean energy, clean technology, and energy transition. So what the IRA does, in short, is that it provides incentives as well as other programs that enable investments in this in order to accelerate that clean energy future. This is obviously for both the United States, but also for our international partners. And we understand several Thai companies that have invested in the United States are already taking advantage of the IRA in order to be a part of that clean energy transition.
Thank you. So it is in the US and internationally as well.
Correct.
Thank you. So the next speaker, please, Dr. Chitti krap.
Thank you so much for inviting us on the stage, Mr. Deputy Directors. I would like to share some ideas on the topics on the carbon pricing, the footprint, and the CBAM. Actually, the previous two speakers mentioned on sustainability and trade, and I would like to emphasize here again that nowadays we have a huge range of certifications, standards, anything like the CBAM that we go into detail. We have the COP that try to be the climate summit. We have another things that important to plastic pollution. We have the SDG. We have SAF, which is a sustainable aviation fuel, the biodiversity and ESG. And you can see here that everything that we run business right now, it's linked with sustainability. Somehow, behind that energies, it's really important issues because of low carbon energies. It's a source that we need to promote everything. So I think everything's related to the energies. Even for the economy's impact, we try to follow in terms of their industries, economies, anything. Even the economics people, when they make such kind of the conference, you can see the topics that you can hear from the event. Net zero transition, the carbon market, circularities of supply chains, social justice and equities, transportations, even energy transition. So everything that relates to energies become economics everywhere. So I would like to mention that even we try to focus on many sectors, tourism, agriculture, energy is behind the scene and very important for everything. When many people mention on the CBAM, I just go a little bit in the detail. Actually, I think one of the main driver right now in terms of the carbon emissions products is a kind of the European Green Deal. And if you follow exactly the idea that EU try to impose in these activities, the target on their carbon neutrality is very important. And after the European Green Deal, I think there are the main three topics that they try to address. The first one is, if you want to go green, you have to make a job creation as well. You try to push more economic growth as well as the greener society. So the three main areas that go together in European Green Deals. And to nowadays, I think today we have a short time of explanation. I try to focus on one segment, which is the CBAM. I try to show the graph that the EU try to propose. If you can see the GDP, that they try to push the GDP every year until 2050. But if you see the emission that EU try to reduce, the target of the 2030 is 55%. Okay, so everything that relates to the activity that can reduce the emission to 55% will be in the package of Fit for 55. And if you really look on the package of Fit for 55, many things here, it's linked to the forestries, products, energy transitions, hydrogen, so many things. So, however, one of the very hot topics here is the CBAM, because of we import, we export, and the product that relate to carbon, it's important here. Cost efficiencies, competitiveness, just and fair transition is linked with the idea of the CBAM as well. The sectors, I think there are, Mr. Shimura mentioned a little bit on the sector of the CBAM. They try to focus on some products, which is the 6 products that are important for the business sectors, which is the cement, iron and steel, aluminum, fertilizer, electricity, and hydrogens. And normally there are some criteria that they select the product to be in the first phase, which is including some precursors or downstream products, select on the high risk of the carbon leakage, cover more than 55% of the carbon emissions, and its practical feasibility. So this kind of 6 products have all criteria for the CBAM. And behind that, if you really look inside the products, it's almost 50% of the emissions come from energies. So energy transition is a huge part of almost everything in every product. They are mentioned on the scope. people here, you are familiar with the carbon footprint, you're familiar with the organization and products, and CBAM is almost the same. Okay, we have the emission that relate to the direct emission. We try to focus on the upstream emissions, but CBAM didn't include the downstream emissions. Okay. Here, I would like to emphasize that the carbon footprint that we are familiar for the last 10 years, it's not similar to CBAM, but they're moving in one direction. We try to reduce overall emissions. And if you can see, actually the scope 2, which is the indirect from electricity, it's a huge part that can help Thai business sectors for exportation. I have some slide that maybe I have a little bit of time to discuss here. I take their data from their international energy agencies recently and try to figure out some countries here, which is Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, United States, Japan, and Australia. So you can see the graph in your right-hand side here. You see the trend of the carbon dioxide emissions per kilowatt of each countries. They are very interesting here. If you can make a small graph here, you can see such kind of their, some countries have a trending up and trending down. And you can see here their emissions of carbon dioxide per kilowatt. US is very good position here. You have really low emissions and you are trending down. So it's great. Thailand, for us, we have not really low emission for electricity, but we have a trending down. Japan, for sure, it's very good and the trend is very nice. Australia have a kind of high emissions of carbon dioxide. I think because of their infrastructures, but Australia have a good progress in terms of reduce their own emissions. Vietnam, I think Vietnam and Indonesia, it's a growing countries. So the source of energy should be quite cheap because we try to push more economic growth. However, if we track the emission of these two countries, I think Vietnam have more potential in terms of the reduce their own emission. However, Indonesia, I think they try very hard right now to control their emission on electricity, but I hope they can reduce their emission very soon. So data is important. We see the progress of every country. We see how they manage on their emissions, and I really hope that Thailand can reduce the emissions of our own countries because it's linked to many products. Some point of view that I would like to mention here address to the emissions or greenhouse gas, I would like to say that data is an asset for everything. You can use for the marketing, you can use for strategies or negotiation. I think it's huge activities. The carbon footprint or CBAM, it's not the same, but they move on the same direction. There are something that maybe not discussed in this stage is the carbon pricing. Okay, I think right now we have around $70, $80, or $50 per ton of carbon dioxide in certain regions. But carbon pricing will accelerate the net zeros and the carbon neutralities. And what I want to say, I think the CBAM that proposed by EU, it's a very effective starting point for the future green business. For sure, this is just a starting point, like Mr. Nishimura mentioned that this is a starting point, but in the next 2 years, there will be more products, more scheme on this topic. Precursors, it's important. It's not just your own emission. You have to track back on the precursor that come to your input. It's a huge part, and it forces to drive the clean supply chain. In certain products, after the research, energy could account more than 50% of carbon embedded emission. So for sure, if the ministries of energies can reduce their emission for the whole countries, it could be great for us. And lastly, I would like to mention here is to achieve the low carbon societies and trade. There are main 3 options that link to Mr. Chair mentioned on the R&D and the promotion of the business. We try to find the low carbon energies for sure with affordable price. Too expensive, it's not acceptable for us. we try as well to promote domestic and international material circularities. If you can circulate everything in the countries, it could reduce our own emission as well. And I think we are mentioned on the carbon capture, CCUS, the nature-based solution. If we can reduce as much as we can, and we can use CCUS as small as possible, it could be great. Because of CCUS, it's expensive, and we try to work out how could be more and more affordable price for developing country like us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chitti. It is a clear presentation for you about the cooperation between among countries, especially the products and service between Thailand and Asian country to the Europe. And I think I work in the energy sector or regulator, I think we have a lot to do about to accelerate the carbon reduction. And as you can heard yesterday, Thailand will go to the UGT or utility green tariff to help initiative to reduce the carbon embedded in the products or the service and invest more from the foreigner in Thailand. I hope so, but from threat to opportunity to grow up the economics as well. Thank you. So the first speaker, Mr. Robo, please, the floor is yours.
Well, I'll start off with just a huge thanks for ERC for hosting this conversation, to the other distinguished speakers, and to all of you for coming. I'm also going to apologize because I'll go about 2 minutes over, so I warned that in advance. You just said that there's a lot to be done still in Thailand, and a lot of my presentation is going to be showing how much has already been done. Thailand is really leading the way, and I see esteemed colleagues here that have really been responsible for that. The ITREC Standard Foundation is really focused on the middle point in between governments and the private sector. And most specifically, this is how do you use demand from corporate buyers to pay for new renewable energy, right? So in today's presentation, I'm going to go through 3 sections. I'm going to start off with just a little bit of background on what renewable energy certificates are. And this is really just to give us a shared terminology that we can use as we move forward. I'm going to focus on more practical aspects of CBAM. So what is this looking like in implementation? What tools are available in Thailand to essentially avoid those taxes and levies as you export into the EU? And then I'll close out with a look at, again, Thailand's overall readiness and the good work that's been done to support economic export readiness as we move into CBAM. All right, so let's pop right in. I want to start off with just a description of RECs, and in its simplest form, a renewable energy certificate is a very basic tracking instrument that tells us where our electricity is coming from. These are developed in US and EU markets, where you have a bunch of power generation, which you see pictured on the left-hand side of the screen, feeding into a grid. And of course, since electrons don't have colors, at least ones that we can see, the end user, the ones that are pulling that electricity out of the grid, have no clear way of understanding where their power generation is coming from, right? So the renewable energy certificate is just a serial number. You create this serial number when you generate 1 megawatt hour of electricity. That serial number contains data concerning where the power was produced, what fuel type was used to produce it, and ownership rights to essentially the green bragging rights associated with it, right? So again, a REC is simply a tracking instrument that tells us where our electricity comes from, right? These have financial value. They're not a financial instrument, but they can be transacted in a couple of different ways. That top row is an unbundled transaction, and the bottom 3 are different examples of bundled transactions. I'm going to highlight the key differences here, right? So in an unbundled transaction, you're buying your electricity from one source. So in Thailand, that's PEA, MEA, or EGAT, right? And then from a separate entity, you're buying a certificate, which gives you the title to green ownership, right? Bundled transactions, which are now scaling up in transaction volumes and are being implemented currently in Thailand, include power purchase agreements. So this is where you're denominating the actual electricity transaction in RECs. So you're doing that transaction together. You would use a similar bundled structure under rooftop solar and leasing scheme agreements. So essentially, you're producing power on your roof, you're consuming that electricity, and you're receiving those REC redemptions to prove that you're consuming that clean electricity. The last component is something which is just at the stage of launch in Thailand, is green electricity tariffs. And this is where a utility or retailer in liberalized markets supply you with both the electricity and the title to clean electricity ownership that comes along with it. Right, so these are primary transaction structures. And these allow corporate buyers, all of the Fortune 500 companies essentially, to make procurement in ways that is transparent and internationally credible. All right, we're getting over to CBAM, don't worry. So there's two primary structures under which the private sector procures renewable electricity certificates. And these are voluntary and compliance structures, right? As the name suggests, under voluntary structures, the companies are going out and buying RECs to prove that they're green. They're doing this essentially for marketing value, and in some cases because they believe it's the right thing to do. They're using the RECs to demonstrate that clean electricity consumption in line with requirements set by global reporting standards, such as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, the RE100, and similar, right? Now, what we're seeing take place worldwide is this fundamental pivot from voluntary-only procurement in the corporate sector to compliance. And there's two new compliance structures that are important to think about, right? The first is financial disclosure. So you have structures like the International Financial Reporting Standard, or IFRS, now mandating that companies disclose the carbon values associated with their production. And perhaps most importantly now, we see the introduction of taxes and levies, which are going to have far-reaching impacts on export economies, including Thailand's. Right, so this brings us into CBAM, and I'm going to focus again on the sort of radically practical aspects of what this looks like in implementation. All right, so the first and simplest way of thinking of this is that CBAM is going to require that exporters shipping goods into the EU disclose product emissions associated with the production process of those goods, right? And in cases where you have a high embedded emission value, you're going to be looking at taxes and levies, right? The second point that I want to focus on under CBAM is what this term embedded emissions really means, right? So when you're exporting a unit of steel or a unit of fertilizer into the EU, what exactly is that embedded emission content? I like to use the image of steak because I'm a huge fan of Japanese Wagyu. I'm often in Bangkok, and when I'm here, I often look for restaurants where I can get authentic exported Japanese beef here, right? Now, I bring this up because if you think about what's actually in this product of beef that I'm receiving here, you've got to think about the grass that cow ate in Japan. And if it's a particularly good marbling like this one, the beer that it's been fed in Japan, right? These are essentially embedded into the beef. And so when I'm eating a slab of delicious A5 Wagyu in Bangkok, it is containing embedded components such as the grass and the beer that it's been fed in the export nation, right? So if you think about that now in the context of steel, fertilizers, and cements that we're exporting into the EU, we're really looking at the electricity, the specific products of electricity that were used to manufacture and produce goods in the exporting country. The third point that I'll point out is that the EU Commission is still working out some rules, right? But one thing that they've defined in a very clear way is that power purchase agreements will be an acceptable instrument to decarbonize your export products, right? So when we're thinking of producing fertilizers in Thailand and exporting them into the EU, the Commission has already said that power purchase agreements, which need to be denominated in renewable energy certificates, will be a valid way of demonstrating reductions, right? There are questions as to what structures an actual power purchase agreement are going to look like in the regulatory framework. We're expecting updates on this midway through next year. What we do know for certain is that any power purchase agreement or structure that will be recognized as a power purchase agreement will need to be denominated in energy attribute certificates or RECs from the perspective of proof, right? I'm going to close out with 2 short slides on essentially what's taking place now in Thailand and what we think we can expect to see next at a regional level, right? So I like to highlight progress, and there has been an enormous amount of progress here, right? So you already have access to credible renewable energy certificates in Thailand, right? So this is the ITRAC standards role in partnership with domestic authorities. We're extremely pleased to be working with EGAT as essentially the overseer of the Thai market. They conduct the issuance functions, right? And so this means that you have a nationalized instrument which is globally credible. So this is really the role of partnerships. I'll also point out that Thailand as a country has potentially the highest level of government readiness within ASEAN. The simple fact of ERC hosting this conversation, looking into the nuts and bolts and the actual details of how the REC market interacts with CBAM is miles ahead of a lot of your peers, right? Looking then at the actual structure of transactional products available in Thailand, thinking back to that sort of diagram where I show RECs feeding into different procurement structures, there is a large diversity of different procurement models available currently within Thailand, right? So you have the ability to do rooftop installations, to receive RECs alongside those. You have the ability to go out and execute long-term procurement agreements with suppliers of RECs, with IPPs, and so forth. And I think that something everyone should really be looking forward to right now is the launch of the utility green tariff, which will make it significantly easier for exporters and for the private sector to procure bundled electricity products with the entities that currently sell them their electricity, right? So PEA, MEA, EGAT, as a cluster, will be able to deliver clean electricity. UGT1 will come in clusters, so from a centralized pool of RECs shared between the utility actors, and UGT2 will look much more like a direct line power purchase agreement with some differences, but essentially allowing an end user to choose a dedicated generation asset from which it wants to procure clean electricity. I think that it's worth pointing out the two primary areas that we should all be looking at next, right? And the first is, how is the EU going to define power purchase agreements? Is this going to require a contract for differences, a direct line? We know that it'll be denominated in RECs, but what other aspects are they going to put on top of that? ITRAC is directly engaged in developing the contract models that we believe will be accepted by the EU Commission. So this looks at structuring those PPAs in an acceptable way. And we're now conducting pilots with major exporters on how to structure these agreements. Stay tuned for updates on that. The last point that I'll make is that individual export countries are going to need to collect their bargaining power to strengthen their ability to influence the EU Regulatory Commission, right? We see one core way of driving this forward is for ASEAN nations to continue and deepen collaboration and form collective bargaining power through forming associations of issuing bodies, so the entities that manage national REC markets, bringing their voices and opinions together and supporting essentially export economies throughout ASEAN. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Robo. It's quite a clear presentation. Actually, when you first presentation, my question popped up a lot, but yeah, the answer is your answer already in the last presentation. We have heard about the rooftop, the self-consumption. Can the producer, pro-consumer, can got a REC? Can you just explain
Absolutely.
more?
Yeah. I mean, so the simple answer is yes, definitely. Any entity that is producing clean electricity or renewables and has the contractual ownership of those environmental attributes can register their project and they can receive RECs. In the context of prosumers, the facility owner, the one receiving the electricity, has two options, right? They can either register the RECs and consume them themselves to prove decarbonization, or they can sell them to a different entity and make no carbon reduction claims. So there's just two different routes that they can take, but it's absolutely available to them.
Okay, in case in Thailand, do they have to register to some authorities to get to approve the direct or the carbon dioxide that they reduce? Which authority?
Well, so this EGAT. I mean, so this is the beauty of partnerships, right? iTrack as an organization sets tracking rules, and they're implemented always by national authorities. So if you're interested in registering a project and sort of engaging in this ecosystem in Thailand, you don't contact the foundation. You reach out to EGAT. They have a separate website which describes exactly their functionality. It hosts all of the key forms, and they can explain to you how to engage in more detail.
Oh, thank you very much. It's such good news. Okay, we come to running out of time. I have one common question for you guys about in your point of view, what do you think which is the key success factor for the energy transition among countries in the world? It is whereas a multilateral initiative or bilateral agreement or some financial mechanisms or a strong government commitment. So please.
Okay, let me start. In one word, I would say communication, I think, is the key thing. As I said, energy transition works across many sectors. So not just in energy, but also in transportation, urban planning, health, education, but also in this region, especially, for example, land use and agriculture is a huge factor. So that would also extend into water resource management and water use. So all of this requires that a government have a comprehensive policy framework that is communicated clearly so that all of the agencies can work towards a single objective. But at the same time, if you look at it also at the international level, with the countries that we've worked with to come up with a roadmap, something that's close to the country climate development report that I just described, for example, Vietnam and Indonesia and South Africa, we see that has led actually to a massive international support. So Just Transition Partnership, for example, have awarded billions, literally billions of dollars of support to these countries because they have shown the resolve, the commitment, and the planning ability on their part to actually execute and to achieve the targets that they've set out on the international stage. And as I have laid out, there are plenty of sources of support that is being made available to the countries. The countries that do not communicate these plans and roadmaps clearly are essentially just leaving these funds and support on the table and walking away. So hopefully Thailand, as well as other countries represented in this conference, would make full use of these support mechanisms that are made available to the countries. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So there is a wide range of mechanisms, but you think the public communication is the most important? Yeah. Okay, Mr. James, please.
I'm going to borrow a term that my distinguished colleague used in his presentation, but I think that the beauty of partnership is one of the most important elements to encourage energy transition internationally. It's through that information sharing, that understanding of priorities between countries, and then the capacity building, technical assistance, and the collaboration that you can get everything from new technologies to a better understanding on how to cooperate together in order to achieve that clean energy future.
So many areas, many countries, but they have different problems. So priority is what you think is most important.
I'd say, I mean, it's impossible to list out everything, but I think that a key factor to working out those priorities is to have a clear understanding of what each country's needs are, but then having a willingness to cooperate and engage with that partner in order to address that partner's needs as well.
Thank you. That's very clear. Dr. Chitty,ครับ.
Thank you very much. I think there are maybe three components that's important here that we just listen to. The first one is, I think, technology is that huge pathway that we have to go. Secondly, I do believe capacity building it's important part. And lastly, maybe the most important is financial support. I think we need more budget on this topic to help everyone reduce their own emission and go for sustainable futures. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, financial support, capacity building, and technology.
Sure.
Thank you. So the last one.
I'm happy to close out on sort of a positive note, which is really that the private sector is here and ready to pay for this new generation. Collaboration plays a very important role here. So having international standards, ensuring that buyers are willing to transact those products, working with development organizations. It's worth pointing out we are supporting USAID on rec market studies in the region, and then absolutely working with host governments and regulators to ensure that these products hit the market in a way that are supporting national objectives and delivering it. So if I had to close out with one point, it's the private sector is willing to pay, and the important piece now is assisting it in landing that capital in the right ways.
So is the government have to create the situation on condition to the private sector want to join and accelerate the change.
Absolutely, and
Thank you.
Thailand is really leading there.
Thank you. So I think I will open to the audience. Any question, please identify yourself, please.
Sorry. Vilayapol Liu-Ksem-san, former Energy Commissioner. I would like to have a question for Mr. Chanya and Chinya and Mr. James. For Mr. Chinya, you mentioned the study, the cooperation that you work with Vietnam. I just want to you to elaborate a little bit that what are the challenge and opportunity for the case of Vietnam. And for Mr. James, that you describe a lot of activities, many activities that, can be done from 5 years or 10 years. But what really the outcome and what are the challenge and the opportunities in case of Thailand, cooperation with the World Bank, as you mentioned. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. So with Vietnam and specifically the country climate development report, that was one of the first what we call CCDRs in the world, actually. CCDRs are a World Bank report. It is not a sort of a co-authored report. It's actually purely World Bank written and authored and published, but of course with the country's agreement. And why that happened is, like I said, Vietnam has identified that it is very extremely vulnerable to climate change risk. 14.7% GDP at risk, 17 million people at risk of losing livelihoods and living arrangements, 300 villages and cities that are at risk on the coastal level. So they have a very large coastal area as well as a Mekong Delta region, which is extremely vulnerable. They're also very dependent on those regions for their economic growth. And so that identification or self-awareness has enabled this partnership to happen. And that has extended to, in this region, China, Philippines, Cambodia, Indonesia, and all of the reports have produced high-quality reports that were enabling the countries to actually take those information and then to seek international support, as I said, for the most vulnerable parts. And like I said, not just in energy, but also in transport, agriculture, land use, water resource management. So just in short, I think that is a perfect example of the communication, importance of communication that I think that exemplifies the cooperation that could happen through clear communication.
Thank you for your excellent question, madam. You're absolutely right. I appreciate you highlighting the amount of cooperation that the United States and Thailand are engaging on. I think that one of the key challenges that both Thailand and the United States see in terms of that bilateral cooperation is whenever there's a change in leadership in the country with elections, there's obviously a change in priorities or what that particular administration decides to pursue. So there might be shifting of priorities, there might be elimination of some priorities. This in turn can affect certain of the work streams that are already taking place. But with that challenge, with that understanding of that challenge, the United States and Thailand are unique in that we have a treaty relationship. In fact, Thailand is our oldest ally in the region. And so even though there might be a challenge of shifting priorities whenever new administration or leadership comes into place, the underlying relationship between the two countries enables a continuity of a lot of those work streams. And even if there is a change in priorities among Thai leadership and US leadership, the foundation of the relationship between the two countries enables both sides to take those shifting priorities and still continue to work on them because we're relying on the strength of our cooperation.